They erased me from every family picture, cropping me out like I never existed. For years, I watched their perfect smiles on social media, staged reunions inside the beach house that once held my laughter. I thought silence was safer, but silence only sharpened my scars. When the invitation never came, I felt the final cut, 10 years of exile sealed with a smiley post. Yet they didn't know, the house they flaunted wasn't theirs anymore, it was mine. And as they walked in, clueless and proud, I stood in the shadows, ready to let truth tear their paradise apart. They called themselves the perfect family. The Carters knew exactly how to pose on Instagram, how to film those TikTok clips where everyone laughed in unison, as though nothing in the world could break their bond. Sunlight kissed their skin in each photo. Their captions preached about family being everything. Their beach house always stood as the shining backdrop, a symbol of wealth, unity, and legacy. Strangers scrolled past those posts and envied them. But I knew the truth. I was never there. For years, I lingered on the edges of those frames. Sometimes, if you looked closely enough, you might spot my shadow, a blur behind someone's shoulder, or the curve of my hand resting awkwardly at the corner of a bench. In one photograph from a 4th of July barbecue, my fingers, painted a chipped shade of red, clung to the picnic table's edge. A week later, the photo reappeared on my mother's account. The hand was gone, cropped out, retouched, erased like it had never belonged. I wanted to scream when I saw it. Not because of the missing hand itself, but because that was me, edited out of my own life. If you scroll through their feed today, you'll find the same smiling faces, year after year, while I became the invisible daughter, the unmentionable sister. And maybe the cruelest part was how easily people believed the illusion. "What a beautiful family," they commented. "You're so lucky." But luck had never been on my side. Growing up, I was never Madeline Carter. I was Laura's shadow. My older sister Laura could do no wrong. She sang in the choir, won every debate tournament, and wore her achievements like crowns my parents polished for her. Daniel, my brother, was the golden boy, excused from mistakes because boys will be boys. I was simply there, filling space, and more often than not, I was told I should be grateful for even that. I remember one Christmas morning when Laura received a necklace, a delicate piece of gold shaped like a heart. Daniel unwrapped a drone, his laughter echoing through the living room. My gift was socks. My father chuckled as if it were a joke, but my mother's eyes told the truth. They hadn't forgotten me. They had chosen not to remember. You might think I exaggerated, but the bruises of exclusion don't always come as shouts. They come as silence, as glances exchanged above your head, as inside jokes whispered just loud enough so you know you weren't invited. And it's strange how silence can hurt more than words. Years later, the silence continued in new forms. A notification buzzed on my phone one ordinary afternoon. A screenshot of a group chat titled Carter Reunion 2021 flashed across my screen. My heart lurched as I opened it. There they were, Laura, Daniel, my parents, excitedly planning a grand reunion at the beach house, the same beach house where I once built sandcastles, the same house where I once believed love was real. They laughed about who would bring the wine, who would handle decorations, who would lead the family toast. But there was no mention of me. For a second, I thought it was a mistake, that my name had been left out accidentally. I scrolled harder, searching for the text where someone might say, "Wait, what about Madeline?" But it never came. Instead, I noticed something else, a stray screenshot, maybe sent to me by accident, maybe on purpose. Laura had written, "We don't need her ruining the vibe. She always makes everything heavy." My mother replied with a single thumbs up emoji. I dropped the phone onto the couch as if it had burned me. My chest tightened, my throat raw from words I couldn't force out. In that moment, the truth solidified like cement in my lungs. I was no longer part of their family. Perhaps I never had been. The tears came in waves, hot and relentless. I pressed my hands to my face and sobbed, but no one was there to hear. No one ever was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when the fracture had begun. Was it the day my hand was cropped out of that photo? Or was it years earlier when my parents had decided I would never shine bright enough to belong? Maybe the fracture had always been there, a hairline crack that widened with each year until, finally, it split into a canyon I could never cross. By dawn, my eyes were swollen, my body hollow. I scrolled back through their social media posts, torturing myself with the perfection they portrayed. I wanted to believe it was real, even if I wasn't part of it. But the truth was undeniable. They had erased me, and worse, they had convinced the world that I never existed. I thought that was the deepest cut I could endure. I thought the pain of exclusion, of being the ghost of the Carter family, was the end of my story. But I was wrong, because the lie that would truly destroy me hadn't been revealed yet. And when it came to light, it would not only explain why I was pushed aside, but it would also make me realize just how deliberate their betrayal had always been. Rumours travel faster than truth, especially in families that thrive on appearances. It started quietly, like a whisper slipping through cracks in the wall. By the time it reached me, it had already grown into a story told with certainty. Madeline stole money from her parents. Madeline betrayed the people who gave her everything. I didn't believe it at first. Who would? I had never stolen a penny in my life. Yet the venom dripped slowly, spreading through every branch of the family tree. Cousins stopped returning my calls. An aunt who once hugged me tightly at every holiday avoided my eyes at the grocery store. Even my grandmother, the one person I thought could never doubt me, sent me a letter that ended with the words, "If you did this, I don't know who you are anymore." I searched desperately for where it had begun. A misplaced receipt? A bank error? Something I had done without realizing? But no matter how many drawers I rifled through or how many statements I collected, there was nothing. Nothing but silence on their end. The worst part wasn't the accusation, it was the ease with which they believed it. One rumour, and I was exiled, stripped of any chance to defend myself. It was as though they had been waiting for a reason to cast me out. I tried confronting my parents. I remember standing in their living room trembling, the walls filled with framed photos of Laura and Daniel smiling. My father sat stiffly in his chair, his hands folded like a judge's gavel. My mother wouldn't look at me. "I never stole from you," I said, voice cracking. "Tell me you don't believe this." My father's lips pressed together. He didn't answer. My mother finally met my gaze, but her eyes were cold. "Madeline," she whispered, "sometimes people do things they don't admit to. Maybe you should ask yourself why they believe it." Her words gutted me. It wasn't just disbelief, it was condemnation, a declaration that I had already been judged and sentenced, without trial, without proof. I left their house that day carrying an invisible mark, one that said thief, liar, disappointment. It clung to me everywhere I went. Days blurred into weeks. I begged for answers, begged for someone to stand up for me, but my messages went unanswered. Laura posted a new photo on Instagram, her arm linked with Daniel's. The caption reading, "Through thick and thin, family first." My name was never mentioned, but the message was clear. I told myself it couldn't get worse. I was wrong. One evening, an envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a photocopy of an old ledger page with numbers circled in red. A note scrawled across the bottom read, "See? Even the books prove it." The numbers showed a withdrawal from my parents' account, and next to it, in careful handwriting, my name. I knew instantly it was a forgery, but to anyone else it looked like proof. And with that, the coffin of my reputation was nailed shut. I sank deeper into despair. I barely ate. Nights stretched endlessly, my mind replaying the same thought. Maybe they were right to hate me. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I had been destined to be the mistake of the Carter family. Until one night, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Attached was a PDF file titled simply "Confidential." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were scanned emails, private correspondence between my brother Daniel and a family lawyer. The truth hit me like a blow to the chest. Daniel had orchestrated everything. It was his handwriting on the forged ledger, his words instructing the lawyer to secure the estate away from Madeline before she complicates things. He had created the lie, planted the evidence, and sat back as the family devoured me. My head spun as I scrolled through the pages. This wasn't just about a rumour, it was about control, inheritance, power. My brother had thrown me to the wolves so he could stand unchallenged at the centre of my parents' empire. And my parents had let him. They chose to believe him. They chose the golden boy over the unwanted daughter. They chose the image of unity over the truth. I remember closing the file, my reflection staring back from the darkened laptop screen. My face looked hollow, pale, broken. For a long moment, I hated that face. I hated being me. If even my blood had decided I was worthless, then maybe I was. Depression swallowed me whole. I stopped answering calls from the few friends who still cared. I stopped leaving the house. My life shrank to a single room where days felt like nights and nights felt endless. Yet somewhere inside the suffocating darkness, a thought flickered. If Daniel had gone this far to erase me, then maybe, just maybe, I was more dangerous to him than I realised. The excluded one, the erased daughter, the so-called thief. Sometimes the person cast aside is the one holding the sharpest blade. The news came to me the way all betrayals do, disguised as something ordinary. My parents announced over dinner with friends that the beach house was being sold. The same house where I had once buried seashells in the sand with Laura. The same house where Daniel learned to swim, while my father clapped proudly from the deck. The house they had sworn would one day belong to all three of our children equally. The promise was gone, brushed aside with a wave of my father's hand. "We're simplifying," he said. "It's too much maintenance for us now." But I knew better. It wasn't about maintenance, it was about control. They were cutting me out one final time, ensuring my fingers could never touch what was supposed to be mine. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment. With what little money I had scraped together over years of work, with the help of a discreet lawyer, I had created a company under a name no Carter would recognise. When the house went on the market, I was ready. I signed the papers in silence, my heart pounding as the deed slid across the table toward me. It bore no trace of the Carter family. It bore only the mark of my company, my shield, my secret weapon. The realtor smiled as if it were just another transaction. But to me, it was the culmination of 20 years of wounds, lies, and erasures. I wasn't just buying a house, I was reclaiming a piece of myself they had tried to destroy. And yet, the moment I held the keys in my hand, I felt nothing, no triumph, no relief, just emptiness. I drove to the beach house that night, the salt wind stinging my face as I unlocked the door. The rooms smelled the same, sunlight on wood, faint traces of ocean air. Memories clung to every surface. The dining table where I once spilled juice and got scolded. The staircase where Daniel shoved me down in a fit of rage while my parents laughed it off as kids being kids. The porch where Laura posed for endless photographs while I stood behind the lens, invisible. Now it was mine, all of it, and still I sat on the porch as the sun bled into the horizon, and I cried. Not elegant tears, not quiet ones, ugly sobs ripped from somewhere deep inside me, the kind you can't control. I pressed my face into my knees, the sound of waves crashing beneath me, and I asked the same question over and over: why wasn't I enough? The house didn't answer. Owning it didn't heal me. It didn't erase the years of silence or the sting of being branded a thief. It didn't bring back the childhood I had lost or the mother's love I had craved. All it did was remind me of what I would never have again. In the weeks that followed, I lived in that emptiness. I walked the halls like a ghost, dusting shelves, opening drawers, touching surfaces as if they might whisper secrets, but nothing spoke. The house was quiet, too quiet, and in its silence I heard my own despair echo back at me. Sometimes at night I sat on the porch again. I would watch couples stroll by on the sand, hear their laughter float up to me, and I would remember being 12 years old, believing that one day I would have that kind of love within my family. Believing that families fought, yes, but that love always won in the end. How naive I had been. One evening, I found myself curled up with an old photo album I had salvaged years ago. The edges were frayed, the pages warped by humidity, but the images inside remained. Laura smiling, Daniel grinning, my parents proud, me in the background, half cropped, half forgotten. I traced a finger over my younger face, the timid smile that still held hope, and I whispered, "I'm sorry for believing, sorry for letting it break me, sorry for not being stronger when I needed to be." The house was mine, but I was still theirs, bound to them by blood, by memory, by scars that refused to fade. And so the nights bled into each other. And I wondered if perhaps I had bought the house not to heal, but to punish myself, to trap myself inside the very place where my illusions had first been built and then shattered. But fate had a darker sense of humour, because while I sat drowning in sorrow, my family was busy planning their next grand reunion. And they chose the beach house. They didn't know it belonged to me now. They didn't know that every email they exchanged with the event planner, every detail of their perfect little gathering was funneling directly into my hands. The house they had erased me from was now the stage where their masks would crack, and this time I wouldn't need to say a word. The first time I sat across from Dr. Ellis, I didn't know what to say. What? I had spent so many years being told to stay quiet, to not make things heavy, that words felt dangerous in my mouth. She waited patiently, her notebook resting on her lap, her eyes steady but gentle. When I finally spoke, it came out raw. They made me believe I was broken, that something was wrong with me, and the more I tried to prove myself, the more they erased me. Dr. Ellis nodded. That's the cycle of a toxic family. They build their identity by creating a scapegoat. And you, Madeline, you were theirs. The word scapegoat stung, but it also clarified something deep in me. I wasn't inherently flawed. I wasn't the mistake. I had been cast into a role so they could shine brighter. For the first time, the weight I carried began to shift. Week by week, therapy stripped away the lies I had swallowed whole. My parents' silence wasn't proof of my guilt. Daniel's schemes weren't reflections of my worth. Laura's perfection wasn't evidence of my failure. I had been their mirror, cracked and unwanted, because they couldn't stand to see themselves as anything less than flawless. One day, I left Dr. Ellis's office with a thought that burned through my veins like fire. I was never powerless. They only made me believe I was. And once I saw the truth, the anger came, hot, sharp, alive. I had spent years curled in the shadows, mourning a family that had never mourned me. Now, as I stood on the porch of the beach house that was legally mine, I realised something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was holding the match that could set their perfect little world ablaze. So when the first email arrived, we'd like to reserve the beach house for our Carter family reunion, I didn't stop it. I let the plan unfurl like smoke curling into the air. Each message made my pulse quicken. The event planner confirmed dates, catering menus were exchanged. My mother signed documents, never once realising that the owner listed on every contract was me. Madeline Carter, the daughter they had erased. I created a folder on my computer, labelling it Reunion Files. With each contract signed, each deposit cleared, my power grew. The house wasn't just a building anymore, it was a stage. And I was scripting the performance that would end their illusion. Still, planning wasn't easy. My hands trembled as I read through contracts late at night, making sure everything tied back to me. The weight of what I was about to do pressed heavily against my chest. Was I cruel for letting them walk blindly into this? Or was this justice, the kind I had been denied for so long? Sometimes doubt whispered in the dark. What if they still find a way to twist it against you? What if they turn you into the villain again? But then I would remember Laura's words in that group chat. She always makes everything heavy. I would remember my mother's cold gaze as she asked me to admit to a crime I hadn't committed. I would remember Daniel's forged documents, the way he wrote me out of my own bloodline. And I would remember the little girl who cried on this porch, clutching her knees to her chest, begging for love that never came. For her, I couldn't back down. The day the final confirmation email arrived, I felt my heart steady. We look forward to welcoming the Carter family for their special celebration, the event coordinator wrote. Attached was the signed contract, my name glaring back at me in bold print. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't fate. This was my hand guiding every step. Still, one question haunted me as I locked the papers in a drawer. When the day came, would I reveal myself? Would I step forward as the rightful owner, face them head on, watch their faces crack under the weight of truth? Or would I stay hidden in the shadows, silent and unseen, letting them trip over the blade I had planted? The thought of confrontation made my blood rush hot, but the thought of watching them crumble without lifting a finger thrilled me even more. Either way, the outcome was inevitable. The stage was set, the contracts were signed, the keys were mine. If they wanted to celebrate on the ruins of my childhood, then so be it. They would do it inside my house, and when the truth struck, it would burn through every lie they had ever told. The day arrived with skies so clear it almost felt staged. The kind of morning that demanded celebration. Sunlight dancing across the ocean, gulls wheeling overhead, waves whispering against the sand. Perfect for a reunion, perfect for a facade. I watched from the upstairs window as the Carter family paraded across the driveway, their laughter echoing as though they already owned the world. Laura carried a bouquet of white lilies, Daniel strutted like a conquering hero, and my parents followed behind, arms linked, their smiles carved from pride and denial. They didn't know, not yet. The event staff welcomed them at the door, polite and efficient. Clipboards in hand, they guided the guests inside, where the long dining table gleamed with polished cutlery and crystal glasses. The house hummed with the illusion of celebration. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. At the check-in desk, the clerk glanced at the documents, then at my parents. His brow furrowed slightly. "Excuse me, are you certain this is your property?" My father bristled. "Of course it is. This is the Carter Beach House. We've owned it for decades." The clerk cleared his throat, holding up the contract. "I'm afraid that isn't correct. The deed is registered under Madeline Carter." The room froze. It was as though the walls themselves swallowed the air. Forks clinked onto plates. Laura's bouquet slipped from her hand, petals scattering across the floor. Daniel's grin faltered, the first crack in his armour, and from above, hidden in the shadows of the balcony, I watched their faces break. The clerk continued, oblivious to the storm he had unleashed. "All events held here are at the discretion of the property owner. If you have any issues, you'll need to speak with her directly." A dozen pairs of eyes darted around, searching. My parents stiffened, my mother's face blanching as though she had seen a ghost. But I didn't step forward, not yet. I wanted them to marinate in the truth, to feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. The security cameras captured every detail, the shock, the disbelief, the slow unravelling of control. For once, I wasn't the one erased from the picture. They were, and yet the climax had only just begun. "Where is she?" Laura snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "She planned this." Daniel's jaw tightened. He pulled at his collar, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "This can't be right. There has to be a mistake." But there was no mistake. One of the staff members wheeled in a file box, placing it on the table. Inside were documents I had arranged to be delivered at that precise moment. Contracts, emails, letters, and at the very top, a folder stamped confidential. Laura's trembling fingers yanked it open. Her eyes scanned the first page, and her face went pale. The truth spilled out like poison. Daniel, the golden son, the heir apparent, the one who had accused me of theft. He was the thief, his forged ledgers, his email exchanges with the lawyer, his elaborate plot to secure the estate and erase me entirely. Every page bore his fingerprints, undeniable and damning. The room erupted. "You did this?" Laura's scream rattled the chandelier. "You lied to us? You destroyed her for your own greed?" Daniel stammered, his usual charm evaporating. I was protecting us. She would have ruined everything." "Protecting us?" My mother's voice cracked, trembling. "You lied. You lied to me, to all of us." My father said nothing. He simply stared at the papers, his face drained of colour, his hands shaking as though the truth weighed more than he could carry. Laura shoved the documents into his chest. "This is your fault too. You believed him. You let this happen." She turned on my mother, tears streaking her mascara. "And you, how could you go along with it? How could you choose him over her?" The family fractured before my eyes, their unity collapsing into shards of blame and fury. Years of denial unravelled in minutes, their perfect image shattering against the cold floor of reality. I stood above them, silent, watching. For the first time, I wasn't the scapegoat. I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was the reckoning. Laura stormed out, her heels clattering down the hall, shouting that she wanted nothing to do with any of them. Daniel slumped into a chair, his hands covering his face, his empire of lies crumbling around him. My mother's sobs echoed through the room while my father simply stared at the broken pieces of the life he had built on deceit. And all the while I remained hidden, steady, calm. For once I wasn't afraid. The girl who once sat on this porch crying for their love was gone. In her place stood a woman who had taken everything they tried to destroy and turned it into her power. This was no longer their house. It was mine. And the story wasn't over yet. The storm that tore through the Carter reunion didn't end inside the walls of the beach house. Word spread faster than the tide. Relatives who hadn't bothered to check in on me for years now called in whispers, their voices tinged with shame. Neighbours, once blinded by the glossy social media image of my family, looked on with raised brows and hushed conversations. The empire of perfection my parents had built collapsed overnight, every brick eaten away by the truth they had tried to bury. The dinner that was supposed to be a celebration had turned into a public trial. My brother, once paraded as the golden son, was unmasked as a liar and a thief. My sister, always the flawless daughter, screamed accusations into the void before running out into the night. My parents, who had prided themselves on being pillars of integrity, were left standing in the rubble of their own denial, faces hollow, reputations ruined. And me? I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't even smile. I stood quietly watching until the silence around me felt louder than their chaos. Then I turned, walked out the front door, and let it close behind me. Sometimes the sharpest blade isn't anger, it's indifference. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin. The ocean roared in the distance, steady and eternal, as though reminding me that life would continue long after their illusions crumbled. I walked down the steps, past the guests still reeling, past cousins who finally met my eyes with guilt instead of disdain. Madeline, one of them whispered, a cousin who had ignored me for years. "I'm sorry. We should have known. We should have seen what they were doing to you." Another voice joined, softer. "You didn't deserve this, any of it." I didn't answer. Their words came too late, but I let them hang in the air, small offerings of truth after years of silence. I didn't need apologies anymore. I didn't need validation. My calmness, my refusal to demand their acknowledgement was the deepest cut of all. Because as I walked away, I left them with a question they would never escape. Who was truly abandoned, the daughter they erased, or the family now drowning in their own lies? In the weeks that followed, I began the slow work of rebuilding. Not a house, not a reputation, but myself. The therapy sessions continued, and each one peeled away the old wounds until I could finally breathe without the weight of their judgment pressing against my lungs. For the first time, I reached out to people who weren't bound to me by blood. Friends who had stood by me in silence now became my chosen family. We shared dinners filled with laughter that wasn't forced, hugs that didn't feel conditional. I discovered that family isn't about who shares your DNA. It's about who shows up when you're breaking and who celebrates when you rise. The beach house remained mine, but I no longer needed it as a weapon. Instead, it became a sanctuary. I repainted the walls, scrubbed away the stains of old memories, filled the rooms with warmth I had never known as a child. Where there had once been echoes of exclusion, there was now music, conversation, and the smell of coffee in the mornings. One evening, I sat on the porch with a close friend, someone who had held my hand through the darkest nights. We watched the sun sink into the sea, its light bleeding gold across the horizon. The air smelled of salt and possibility. I leaned back in my chair, my heart unburdened in a way it hadn't been since childhood. For the first time in decades, I felt peace. Not the fragile peace of denial, but the steady peace of freedom. I thought I needed them to survive, I admitted softly. But I didn't. I just needed to believe I was worth surviving for. My friend smiled, their eyes reflecting the sunset. And now you do, I nodded, a small laugh breaking through my chest. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't triumphant. It was simply real. The journey had taken me from exclusion to despair, from despair to anger, from anger to truth. And now truth had carried me here, to the other side, where I no longer defined myself by the wounds they gave me, but by the life I was building without them. The little girl who once cried on this very porch, begging for love that never came, was gone. In her place sat a woman reborn, stronger not because she had fought them, but because she had chosen herself. The waves crashed below, steady, eternal. I closed my eyes, breathed in the salt air, and let it carry me into tomorrow. My story wasn't one of revenge anymore. It was one of rebirth. And as the ocean whispered against the shore, I smiled. Not because I had won, but because I was finally free.